Hello students. Once again, I'm appending a new intro to something that was recorded in a previous semester. So first I'm going to talk about two new items to visual communication in the news. The first one is a story called Big Tech's Original Sin, and what it talks about is the fact that these new social networking tools privileged growth over everything else. So now as they're trying to sort of be good citizens and not share people's data, etc. They can't undo the fact that expanding their users often engage them in things that were somewhat unscrupulous, if not actually illegal. And then the next one is one that we've already encountered this semester, but it's coming back. It's Amazon asked to limit facial recognition software. So different vendors have different facial recognition software. All of them to some degrees are a little bit sketchy, and so the one by Amazon seems to be particularly problematic in terms of what's called the white guy problem of artificial intelligence, in that it might do pretty good facial recognition on white males, and it does not do nearly as well on females or people of color. And yet Amazon is selling this facial recognition software to police departments. And so therefore there are a group of sort of AI experts who have asked them to not do that until they have fixed it. And then what we're going to do is jump right into a video lecture that I recorded a previous semester, and it starts with what was then a piece of visual communication in the news from about a year ago, and it's called Gothic or Helvetica for Brands, Fonts Help Tell a Story. And so with no further ado, we'll jump into that, and then I may append a new ending to this week's video introduction as well. The first thing is visual communication in the news. There's one item this week, and it was actually in today's hard copy of the New York Times. I think it was in the electronic copy last week. And in the electronic version, the title is Gothic or Helvetica for Brands, Fonts Help Tell a Story. And this is a particularly relevant piece of advertising and media journalism at this point in the curriculum, because at the end of today's introduction I'm going to introduce you to the final project. So last week I introduced you to visual design project number 3, where you're going to use motion to somehow either instruct or persuade something. And I've got some samples from previous semesters, a couple in there that you can look at. But we'll end up today by talking about the final project. But the visual communication in the news item is a story about how important corporations consider font to be. And so they start with an example of the font for the Netflix show Stranger Things. And it's a pretty interesting graphic font, and it has sort of become very popular all over the web, partially because of the popularity of that show, but also probably because of its aptness to what the show is about. And so the article gives examples of different corporations that have redone their brand and paid considerable attention to the font when they were redoing their brand. And so the examples they have are Southwest Airlines, Remax, Domino's Pizza, saying they've placed more focus on fonts as a crucial part of their marketing. They also mentioned that the Gap basically changed their font without giving much thought to it, and people rebelled and hated the new font, and they changed it back to the original one. So it's an interesting article to read because it takes into consideration things like the look and feel of the font, the color of it, and the demographics. So one of the things they realized as Remax was redesigning their brand was that 34% of current home buyers are millennials, a group that relies heavily on digital devices. Well, their old logo, this balloon, and the old font type didn't do well on digital platforms. It got kind of blurry. So once they realized that most of their target market was looking at their content online, it was important for them to revamp their font and their logo for that medium. So you want to take a look at that, and once again, I've placed it at the top of the visual communication in the news module. All right, so Illustrator versus Photoshop. Most of you are pretty familiar with Photoshop from having done Visual Design Project number 2. So even if you didn't actually use that tool, you understand what's involved in taking a photograph and making adjustments to it. There are a lot of things for which you could use Photoshop or Illustrator. You could use either one and get the result that you want. And then there are other times when you really want to use Illustrator and not use Photoshop. And so there's a page in there that basically just talks about what is the difference between these two. And the difference is the difference between vector graphics and raster graphics. And I've got a page that explains all this, but I'll tell it to you. So if you use Photoshop and you made a red circle that was that big, it would be a circular shape, and it would be filled with red pixels, bright red pixels, and there would be however many pixels as it took to fill that, say, 3-inch diameter circle that you made. You could use Illustrator and also make a 3-inch diameter circle, and what you were looking at would indeed have some red pixels, but it would not be made out of pixels in the same way that Photoshop raster graphics are made out of pixels. Vector graphics are made out of math, so it would be a very small file, and that file would have in it the formula for a circle, the dimensions of the diameter of the circle, and then it would have the code for the hexadecimal code for, say, bright red, which is FF0000. So if you made your 3-inch bright red circle in Photoshop, and then you had it in a document and you started dragging it on the corner and expanding it, eventually it's going to turn pink, because what's happening is it has a set number of red pixels in it, and you spread those over a larger area, and now there's a bunch of white space between the red pixels, and it doesn't look bright red anymore. And also, if you drag it out big enough that the edge of that circle is going to quit looking like a smooth circular line, and it's going to look like steps, bump, 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 because the pixels that are in the circle are now spread out to the point where you can see one pixel after another. On the other hand, if you've got your 3-inch diameter red circle in Illustrator, you take that and you grab the edge and you expand it, and it gets bigger and bigger and it stays bright red. And that's because you are not taking a set number of pixels and spreading them over a larger and larger area. You're just changing one part of that bit of mathematics, the part which is describing the radius or the diameter of the circle. All the other stuff, the fact that it's a circle, stays in the formula, and the fact that it's using the hexadecimal for bright red stays the same, and what it does is it fills that entire area with bright red instead of taking X number of pixels and spreading them out over the area. So why does that become important? It becomes important in something like designing a logo. So you've got this lovely logo, and it looks really nice when it's printed on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And you say, okay, I've made it in Photoshop, and now I'm going to give this to the printer, and they're going to print it and make ads for the side of a bus. And they take that thing and expand it to be big enough on the side of a bus, and now the colors are all faded and the lines are all jaggy, because the raster graphic was not meant to be resized tremendously, because it had a set amount of information in it. You took that information, spread it over a much bigger area, and now what you have is a very pale version of the original information. If it was made in Illustrator, you could make it big enough to fit on the side of a bus, and the colors will be just as bright and the lines will be just as smooth. You put it on a billboard, and so basically anything that needs to be expanded to much bigger sizes are used in a variety of different venues. Illustrator is most likely the tool that you want to use to create that graphic. So following that page that explains that, I then have a page where I have 2 different videos, about 10 minutes videos by this guy named Terry White. He's wonderful. One of them is for Illustrator Creative Cloud, and one is for CS6. And each one takes you step by step through the creation of something. The one for, I think it's CS6, has you make the Android robot, and that one's a little easier to follow. The one that's for Creative Cloud has you make the yin-yang symbol, and that's a little more challenging, but they're both pretty easy. And so I recommend, if you have access to Illustrator, that you go through the steps and do it, because basically then what you've got is, as Terry White regularly puts in his videos is the top 10 things that people want to know in Illustrator, and those 10 things are in each one of those demos. Just as there is a free open source version of Photoshop called GIMP, there is a free open source version of Illustrator, and it's called something, I can't remember what it is, something, Inkscape. And so I have not yet put in a page with a link to that, but I'll put that in this module. So again, if you don't have Illustrator, you could download Inkscape for either a Mac or a PC, and everything, pretty much everything that you can do in Illustrator, you can do in Inkscape. What often happens is Adobe comes up with a new and wonderful thing that's in the latest version, which is not in the free and open source versions, but it's only a matter of time before it shows up. So you could probably actually follow the step-by-step instructions that Terry White is giving for Illustrator using Inkscape. I have something that I made. I made a little logo for this what do I want to call it, a document that I made. And so I will put that, I have not yet put that in, but I'll put it in probably with going through the stages and showing how I had converted one Illustrator document into a very different Illustrator document. If we're lucky, I'll put that in by tomorrow evening. Okay, and then what I've put in are some samples of visual design projects number 3 from past semesters. I think I only put in 2 of them. So that document talks about the fact that there are 2 ways to make something that is hard to understand easy to understand in terms of motion. And one is to speed it up, and the other is to slow it down. So things that happen very quickly. So like in the examples that I had already put in there, Roger Federer's tennis serve. When he does it in real time, it's so quick you can't see the parts of it. But when you slow it down tremendously, you can see how at one point basically his arm then comes back and is cocked back this, and he gets this sort of, lever and fulcrum action that greatly accelerates his serve. So if it's too quick to understand in real time, then you slow it down. Well, there's a lot of things that move too slowly to really understand in real time, such as how a caterpillar turns into a butterfly. So there's some wonderful things made by PBS and Nature where you can see, in 1 minute, a process that otherwise might take 2 weeks. And so if you're sitting there trying to watch it for 2 weeks, yeah, you would see all the parts, but it would take forever. So slowing something down or speeding something up are 2 ways that you can use motion to communicate. So the 2 samples I put in there's this one from a previous student, and basically she has, I think it's her boyfriend, demonstrating certain dives. So she's got the name of the dive, the label telling you what dive it is. He does it in real time, and he does it in slow down time. And then the other one is a cooking video. And several people in past years have made cooking videos, and some of them were just fine, but there was nothing about the motion in it that really was helping explain how to make that item. So just writing it out would have been just as effective. But in this case, because it involves sort of manually manipulating some Oreo cookies, etc., in this case, seeing the way the cookies are formed is a case where the moving video actually does enhance the instructions on how to make these white chocolate Oreo cookie drops. So I put those examples in there. And then there is a page in there for the Encyclopedia of Major Marketing Campaigns, and that relates to the final project. And so I'm also introducing you to the final project today. Now, once again, in past years, people in the face-to-face class worked in, 4 people on a team, and so I do not yet have any people saying, gee, I really want to work on a team. A couple people, when I originally surveyed you at the beginning of the semester, said, yeah, I'd like to, but I haven't heard back from anybody. But that is still possible, it's still possible for you to do the project number 3 as a team, because that's not due for a couple of weeks. So if it would really be helpful for you to have somebody else working with you as you videotape something, by all means, get in touch with one of your classmates if you know them well enough to communicate to them. And if you don't, you could get in touch through me, and I will try and get you a teammate, or I could be your teammate if it came to that, where you needed some help video recording something. But the Encyclopedia of Major Marketing Campaigns, I've got a link in there to an electronic version. The version is the 2007 version. I can probably put in a link to a more recent version. There's an older hard copy version in the library. But what that does is it talks about something, say, McElhenney, who makes the hot sauce, and they decide they're going to start a new ad campaign. And so what happens is they talk about their product and the demographics of their target market, and then they talk about some things that need to change or some things that they want to fix. And so what these items are is sort of the thinking behind the change or the beginning of a new advertising campaign. So the final project you have for this course is to redesign a Fortune 500 company logo, their font, their tagline, etc. So let me see if I can go to the actual assignment and read to you a little bit from it, but I will also put that into this week's links so that you can get down there with ease. And what it is final project, visual campaign redesign. So it says, in this final project, you'll propose, design, and present a visual campaign for a Fortune 500 company or a public health organization that you feel needs to have its image, brand, and logo updated. And I mentioned the public health organization because there's a couple people in this program now who are in the health communications strand. So it turns out several Fortune 500 companies are health related, and in years past several people actually chose to try to redesign. One year it was CVS, another year it was one of the other major health providers. So this is what you're going to redesign: a Fortune 500 company or a public health organization. In past face-to-face deliveries, people did groups, so we'll talk about if anybody wants to form a group, I will do what I can to facilitate that. The visual campaign that you propose does not have to be for a specific product. It can focus on the identity, brand name, or public image of the company or organization. Conversely, it could focus on a product. So Cadillac is a particular product of General Motors. So you could say, well, we're not going to touch the whole General Motors logo, image, and everything. We're just going to go for Cadillac. Right? First, you'll write a brief critique of the current image, brand, and logo, explaining why these elements no longer serve the company well. Reasons could include changes in the goods or services the company provides. For example, the evolution of the Starbucks logo. Once upon a time, they just did coffee and tea, and now they're doing coffee and tea and breakfast and lunch, and pretty soon they'll probably do dinner and takeout. And so what happens is the logo has evolved to something that no longer even says coffee and tea on it. Now it's just a picture of that mermaid because they're not just limited to coffee and tea. Or the demographic shifts that have made a brand seem outdated. For example, Buick's current efforts. So for a long time, Buick was kind of this stodgy old brand, and people thought of it, this was your grandfather's Buick. Actually, that was an early one. It was, this isn't your grandfather's Oldsmobile, I think was the campaign. But now if you look at the Buick ads that are on TV, they're definitely catering to a much younger demographic. Another reason to change the image and logo is to shed associations or scandals or controversies. For example, Volkswagen, FIFA, Touring Pharmaceutical, or Wells Fargo's bank. Each one of those has been involved in sort of a near catastrophic scandal or multiple scandals in the near past. So is it possible that in order to remedy part of their problem, what they should do is rename the company, get a different logo, a different font, a different tagline? Next, you will write a design proposal that analyzes the visual elements you plan to use, applying one or more of the visual analysis concepts we have discussed in class. So you could go at this from a variety of different takes, figuring out what it is, the product or the goods or service or company that you are redesigning, and take into consideration the demographic, the people that they're trying to reach, and then what approach, what theory for analyzing the visuals is going to work best with that product and that audience. You need to justify the design principles, typography, and color palette you plan to use. And so in that visual communication, the news article that I mentioned at the beginning of this recording, they actually talk about some of the different the look and feel and color of different fonts, etc. You will collect or design visual elements you need for the project according to the analysis in your proposal. You can download graphics or photos from the company's website and revise them for your design. So let's say you're going to use Volkswagen, right? Well, you can just download from a Volkswagen site the actual Volkswagen materials, and then using Illustrator or something else, you could make adjustments to them there. So, you maybe want to change the color or change the austerity of it and make it more youthful and fun, etc. You can use any program, for example, Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, Pages, Publisher, to develop your design. Your design must include some textual content which you can borrow from the company, or you can write your own copy for the new corporate motto, slogan, or tagline. And there's a link there to a site that collected what it believes to be the 100 best taglines ever. So there's things like, McDonald's for a while had "You deserve a break today." Coke adds life was one they had for a while. So that tagline, what it is saying, and the font that in which it says it, are connected to this whole identity, this image of the brand. Finally, you will prepare and deliver a PowerPoint, Keynote, or Prezi presentation to the class. Your final project will be evaluated according to the following criteria. 1, quality of the proposal. So you're going to say some things about something that needs to be changed. You want to make reasonable claims about why it needs to be changed, why it's outdated. The aesthetics and creativity of the design. So in the past, some people did a really good job on the analysis and what they wanted to do, and then they came up with something that visually was not as good as the thing that they were going to abandon. So, these things that you're changing, these Fortune 500 companies have often put a lot of time and effort into their logo, and so it's generally a pretty good quality item graphically, but maybe it's outdated. So it needs to be changed, but arguing that you're going to replace it with something that's not as visually powerful as the original is something that's probably not going to fly. And then the denotative and connotative messages of your design. So this brings us then back to Roland Barthes. So you've got what it is that it's actually saying, and then what is some connotation of it. And so I've probably already mentioned this, but if I haven't, many of you have probably looked at the FedEx logo, and you look how the relationship between the letter E and the letter X actually creates an arrow that's going off to the right. And once you see the arrow, you can never not see the arrow. And the arrow is like pointing that, this is where we're going. We're FedEx, we're on the move, we're pointed, we're directed, we're this very powerful arrow symbol. Okay, and then denotative and connotative messages of your design, and the delivery of your final presentation to the class. So we'll figure out how you can do that. Ideally, this would be something where you have a PowerPoint or a Prezi or a website, and once again, we, members of the class, are able to experience it, hearing your voice as you're communicating to us the ideas that are behind the images that are then projected onto a screen somehow. So again, actually videotaping yourself in front of a screen is one way of doing it, but narrating a PowerPoint is another way of doing it, okay? Linked below is a PDF of the proposal for a redesign of Best Buy that was produced by a team in fall of 2015. The team included Alicia Bellamy, Erno Jure, Lisa Quinones, Nikki Scalia, and Ellen Thompson Napa. And so then I have a link to the Best Buy team PDF. So it gives you basically their argument for what they were going to do, their new logo, the graphics, etc. And they did a pretty nice job on it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move that final assignments page into the module for this week. All right, here's the new ending to this week's introductory video, and that is that I have taped a brief summary of the 2 scholarly articles about vlogs, and I will stick that into this week's collection of pages. It'll be the first page in the list, and then everything else there I think will make good sense. So if it doesn't make good sense, by all means get in touch with me and talk to you later.